Hi guys, welcome to a very rainy afternoon in Kigali. It's been raining pretty much non-stop for the past couple of days now, and it's got to the point where I'm actually considering building an ark, just in case. But I wanted to show you something that I've only just discovered. And when I tell you about it, you're probably going to go, what, you didn't know about that? But I live a very sheltered life. I don't have a television, don't have a radio. I have limited contact with the outside world. So to me, this blew my mind. And basically, the other day I was watching a couple of Japanese vloggers, Tokidoki Traveller and Akidearest, and they were giving some tips now that Japan's opened up again. They were giving some tips to tourists about, visiting the country. And in the second tip, Akidearest pulled out her phone and said, get Google Translate on your phone. Now, I've always known about Google Translate, and I use it on the computer. I use it on my laptop. I go to the Google Translate website, and I've always known that you can type in other languages and get them translated to and from English. And a few years ago now, they added Kinyarwanda to that. So Kinyarwanda is the national language of Rwanda, and it's not a completely obscure language, but it's not a very widely spoken language. It's not like Swahili, which is spoken throughout the whole of East Africa. Kinyarwanda is very specifically in Rwanda, though it's very close to Kirundi, which is spoken in Burundi. They're all Bantu languages, but, Kinyarwanda is very specific to Rwanda. And so to actually see that up there, alongside French and English, and Spanish is kind of incredible in itself. And I've used that pretty much since it first came out. If I know that I need to go and do something, I don't know the word for something, I type that in and I try and memorize it before I go. But what this video showed me that I had no idea about is that if you download the app onto your phone, you just have to point your phone at any piece of text and it will translate it for you. You don't have to type anything. And I watched this and I was like, yeah, well, of course that works with Japanese. That's like a major world business language. That's not going to work with Kinyarwanda, is it? So I went and got this. Now, this is Maguru Nsibika. So a few years back, there used to be a large East African supermarket chain called Nakumatt. It's Kenyan. But it came to Rwanda. There are a few Nakumatt stores here. And it was a really big supermarket that sold pretty much everything. Unfortunately, it expanded too quickly. It went bust and it no longer exists. But when it did exist, they had a whole stack of children's storybooks for like all ages. And in an attempt to try to improve my Kinyarwanda, which is absolutely non-existent, I thought that I would go and get some children's books because I was thinking, I like reading, I like stories. Maybe if I was reading a story, I'd get sucked into it and I'd memorize things a bit better. Now, I never got beyond the first page, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the reason that I wanted to try it on this one is because I have wanted to read this book ever since I got it. I've had it for about 3 or 4 years now because this is my favourite Rwandan folk story. And the reason it's my favourite Rwandan folk story is because I think it's probably the first Rwandan folk story I ever knew. Because again, years ago, probably about 15 years ago now, I was friends with, and still am friends with, some musicians who had a band called Holy Jar Doves. Now, Holy Jar Doves were really big back then. They had a hit song called Maguru, and they sang the ancient Rwandan story of Maguru Nsibika. So Maguru is a warrior. And Maguru means long legs. So he's a long-legged warrior. And It's about his fight, his struggle with a mythical being called Insibika. So Insibika are a type of being, they're shapeshifters. They can take any form. So the really quick version of Magaru and Insibika goes a bit like this. Magaru decided to go off hunting one day with his brothers, and they were going into the forest to search for deer. And before he goes, his mum stops him and says, look, my son, be very, very careful. There are lots of strange beings out there in the woods. And, you've got to be careful what you pick up, what you touch, because Insibika can take any form. And if you're not careful, you'll reach for something and Insibika will catch you. And he's like, yeah, mum, whatever. And off he goes on his hunting party. He goes off into the wood, and after a little while, they come across a deer in the wood. And Magaru glances down and he sees a stick, a long, sharp, pointed stick on the floor. And he thinks, oh, that would make a really good spear. I could throw that at the deer and then we've got something to eat tonight. So he reaches down to pick up this spear, and just before he touches it, he remembers his mother's words and he's like, oh, gotta be careful. Don't know if that's, a real spear or not. And the minute he steps back, the spear transforms into Insibika, who's like, Magaru, I almost had you. So Magaru continues on his way. All of this hunting, eventually he gets very thirsty. So they come to a stream. And next to the stream is this beautiful calabash. And he looks at this and says, oh, I could use that to scoop up some nice cool water and satisfy my thirst. So he goes to pick up the calabash. And just as he reaches for it, he hears his mother's words again. It's like, my son, be careful. You don't know what you're picking up. And he steps back and he's like, oh yeah, almost touched that. And just as he steps back, the calabash turns into Insibika, who's like, oh, grr, Magaru, I almost had you. And so off Magaru goes again, and they're hunting, and the day grows long and he's getting tired, and eventually they come to this beautiful clearing in the woods, and it's shaded and the birds are singing, so he sits down and relaxes. And as he's sitting there, he notices a shadow out of the corner of his eye, and he looks over and this beautiful woman walks into the clearing in the woods. And Magaru can't help himself. He looks at this woman and he's sort of like, wow, and he goes over to her and he reaches out for the woman and takes hold of her, and the woman turns into Insibika and catches Magaru. So I really like that story. I think it's just a really nice story about, it's kind of like, it doesn't matter how on guard you are, there's always one weakness that can get through your defences. Something that we're blind to. Anyway, I really like that. And the song is fantastic. So if you want to listen to it, to the Holy Jar Dove song, I'll put the link below. And it was huge at the time because it's a reggae song that's just really catchy. And I love it because there's all of these sort of little bits of folklore dotted throughout the song. Like in the chorus, at the end of the chorus, they sing this line, don't judge my Kinyarwanda, please. It sounds like Sinje Wahara Hahira Magrun Sabika. It's kind of a fascinating line because there's some folklore about telling folklore. So the folklore or the superstition rather, is that you should never tell stories during the daytime, because if you tell stories during the daytime, it's bad luck. So you have to wait till nighttime when it's the hush time, the listening time, and everybody gathers around to listen to the story, and that's the right time to tell stories. But at the end of the story, when you've finished telling a story, you have to end the story correctly. And the way that you do that is by making absolutely clear that you are just the storyteller. It is not you in this story. It is the characters in this story. So Sinje Wahara Hahira Magrun Sabika basically means it's not me in this story. It is Magaru and Insibika in this story. Because if you don't make it clear that you're not in that story, there's a danger that your soul could get trapped inside the story, that you could get trapped in that story. So you've got to make it very clear, it's not me in this story, it's Magaru and Insibika. and that's the end of the story. So I love like folklore, superstitions and stories like that. It's fabulous. But anyway, long story short, I meant to learn to read this. I was going to get somebody to come over, ask a friend to come over, read it to me, teach me how to read it. I just never got round to it. Life gets in the way. So I never got beyond the first page. So the first page, I used the small vocabulary that I have to try and figure it out. And when I couldn't figure something out, then I went onto Google Translate and I typed in the words and tried to piece it together. So the first page, and again, please don't judge my Kenya on this, but Kera habieho umugabo numugorewe bakagira abuhungu batatu umuhungu wa mbiri yitwaga, I think that's Yitwaga Maguru. Anyway, so I love this. So Kera habieho or Chera habieho, depending on your accent, Kera habieho, basically means in Kinyarwanda, once upon a time, because every story begins a long time ago. Every story in the world begins once upon a time. So Kera habieho means once upon a time in Kinyarwanda. So umugabo numugorewe, there was a man and a woman. Abahunga batatu. So there were 3 children is I think what I got from that. Oh, I think there are 3 sons. Umuhungu wa mbiri yitwaga maguru. Now, I got this wrong because back then, I always used to get this wrong, is the word for 2 is kabiri. And whenever I hear mbiri, I think mbiri means kabiri. I think it's 2. So I wrote down the second son was called Maguru. But I know now that mbiri means first. So, if you say ngie mamuji imbiri ngie Kigali Heights, something like that, you're kind of like saying, I'm going to town, but firstly, Mbiri, I'm going to Kigali Heights shopping centre. So I know now that the first son is called Maguru, which makes far more sense because the hero is always the first son, either the first son or the last son. But yeah, anyway, technicalities. The reason that I never got much further is because, it takes forever to type all of these words into Google Translate. So I'd have to sit there typing word after word. So if it can do that, then potentially I could read this and then I would know the full story of Maguru and Nsibika, which I would love to do. Because I love the song, but it's very short, in terms of the story. And I'd love to know what the full story is. So let's give it a go and find out. So the first thing we're going to do is open up the Google Translate app. And here you can just type anything for translation. Then at the bottom, you can flick between the 2 languages you've chosen. But it's the camera function that we want to test out. So here's the original Kinyarwanda text. And, oh, that's absolutely nuts. It appears over the top of the original text, so it looks like the book was actually written in English. Oh, wow. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but this is incredible. And incredibly accurate. Okay, let's try the next page and a chunkier piece of text. Whoa! I didn't even have to press anything. It just automatically scanned the page and translated. Oh, it's gone again. But I think if I press the capture button, it takes a screenshot, which might be more stable. Oh, yeah, my internet connection is a bit temperamental. Oh, that's crazy. Okay, what about an entire page of text? Oh, that is truly incredible. The tense is a bit fuzzy, but you definitely get enough of the story to figure it out. You get the gist of it. Okay, so just out of curiosity, I'm going to switch to English and see how it does translating the other way around. So this is an incredible short story collection. It's a whole range of adult fiction genres written by Rwandan authors, and it's the only fictional short story collection of its kind in English that I know of. But it's a bit heartbreaking because it's no longer in print. But let's try out my friend Jean's story. He's given me permission to use it as an example. Okay, so here's the original text in English, and let me switch to Kenya. Now, my Kenya isn't good enough to judge this, so if you're watching as a Kinyarwanda speaker, let me know in the comments below if it's doing a good job or not. Would you say it's accurate? And if not, do you still get enough of the story to piece it together? Or has it gone completely off the rails? I mean, that is umufumu. That is witchcraft, man. That's witchcraft. That is. I don't know. I actually feel a bit emotional about that. Why am I emotional about that? I guess I'm a little bit annoyed that I've only just found out about this. I'm incredibly grateful to Akidearest for having mentioned this. But I'm also just, I guess the reason I'm emotional is because, it took me so long, so laboriously painstaking long to sit there and work out the first page with my limited vocabulary and typing it into Translate, and that you can just pick up your phone and it does it so easily. You know what I mean? It's the fact it can take something that took me so long to do and it can just do it instantly like that. And the fact that I now have access to a whole load of these books that I've got that I couldn't read before, and I can just sit there and read them now. I mean, I don't get this emotional over a calculator. I can't count and calculators can, and I don't feel like crying every time I use a calculator. But to me, that's kind of special. So just thank you, Google, for doing that. I mean, first of all, that Google Translate exists in the first place. And secondly, that you've got Kinyarwanda on there. I mean, that is just astonishing. It really is. And amazing. And it almost makes up for you locking me out of my account. But it's kind of 50-50 there. But I mean, seriously, that is just incredible. So I'm going away now to finish reading the rest of Margaru and Nsibika. Thank you.